You ever play a board game that looks like this?
Yeah. Wait a minute. Ah.
A little too much going on for me.
Exactly. Good design is very important in a game, especially keeping it simple and having an effective graphic presentation. While developing games for different companies and coming up with my own prototypes, I came to this realization that graphic presentation can make or break your game. According to board game critic Mario Lanza, in the game whose functional design is most polished, no obtrusions distract players from the gameplay itself, leaving them to focus on the game and not be distracted by any frustrating factors. Good design principles make your game easier to teach, easier to understand, and decrease frustration. Specifically, cards, rules, and parts design are essential to the gameplay experience. The majority of card games use cards in some fashion, and so card design should be a high priority. For cards that are held in a hand, there are two important factors right off the bat. First one is that they're fannable. In a poker game, you want to look at your hand and feel like that. As you can see, the information is right in the corners, so that even if you had a whole bunch of them, you'd be able to tell what they were without having to separate them into separate cards. On the other hand, something like this is terrible because the corners are very small, they would overlap easily, you wouldn't be able to read them, and you can't tell the difference between the sixes and the nines. They also need to be reversible so that no matter how they're dealt to you, when you look at them, they're going to look the same. This is a better design for 6 and 9. This is the standard playing cards. When possible, if you have text on cards and there are terms that are reused, try to substitute them for icons. The game design textbook, Rules of Play, strongly recommends this practice, as it also encourages you to memorize the two icons, and then it's easier to play the game later. In addition to what's on your card, you also want to see if you have multiple types of cards, if you can make them different sizes so that they don't accidentally get put together. They also need to be thick enough that you can't see through them, and if you make cards later, make sure that the card backs match so that you can't tell which cards are from when. While many cards are driven by cards, there are usually other parts to consider as well. Colors for pieces require forethought, as do any scoring methods that you use. Shannon Appleseed, head of the SCOTUS game company, says that good use of color is essential, as it can cause frustration throughout the entire game if done improperly. The colors need to be distinguishable. So if you can see here, the playing pieces are kind of shades of brown and green. This is not a good design because these are easy to mix up, and people will be moving the wrong piece, and then you'll have to go back and somebody might accidentally cheat. What you want to do is stick to primary colors whenever possible. So here, red, green, blue, black, those are all good choices for colors. What you do want to be careful of, though, is that if you have a board that has colors or other pieces that have colors, try to not have them match the player colors. Because people like to, they would stick with a color when they play different games. So if they always play red in a game, and then they see red pieces that don't go with that, then there's going to be some confusion. This is another good example of different colors that you can use. It's also backed up by icons in the corners, so that you can easily tell what the colors are and make the cards different without just relying on color. You also want to keep the colorblind in mind if possible. This is another good example because, as you can see, they use all different colors that are easy to tell apart, but they also have a texture in the background so that even if you can't see the colors, you can tell the cards apart. Score tracks should be numbered on every single space so that when people say you get 5 points, it's easy to move from one number to the next. Something like this is bad because you have to, each other space, the even numbers isn't labeled, so it requires that extra step of thought. This is a better example because every square is numbered and all the 5 spots are highlighted. However, you also want to make sure that the score track is long enough so if you're scoring a lot of points in a game, you don't want to have to go over the track 4 or 5 times to get final scores. Once the parts are designed, then you have to get people to learn the game from the rules. And rule design is especially important. Award-winning game designer Stephen Glenn says that the most important part of rules design is to use as few words as possible, but be perfectly clear. You want to use bullet points, bolding, and caps to accentuate important terms, and use examples whenever appropriate. Here's another good example. This is actually from one of my games, where there are specific graphics that tell you, what the cards are, what the parts are, and charts for anything that really needs to stand out. What's also good is to have player references so that any complicated information can be in a separate part, so you don't have to be going to the rules every few minutes. And what a bunch of companies are doing now is actually making instructional videos and putting them up on YouTube. So you actually have someone there teaching you how to play the game instead of just having to look at a piece of paper. If you pay attention to card design, parts design, rules design, it's a very simple process to do this. You'll have a game that presents no barriers to understanding and can be enjoyed by everybody.
Cool. Questions for Dave?